Good evening and welcome to the Monday, September 23rd, Washougal City Council Workshop Meeting. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger. Councilmember Greenlee.
Here.
Councilmember Polinsky.
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker.
Roger.
Councilmember McDaniel.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Present.
Councilmember Lindsay.
Here.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public that would like to address council before we get started this evening? Mark.
For all of you who do not know me, I am Mark Watson, and I am on the board of Dogpaw, who is currently helping the City of Washougal Police K-9 Division help fund Dingo's replacement. And I wanted everybody to know we are a little over 30 or 70%, so we are close to our goal, which will be coming up here on October 19th. This Saturday, September 28th, Milltown Pizza has graciously joined forces with us and the City of Washougal, and they are donating 10% of an all-day return of what they sell at their restaurant to Dingo's Retirement Fund. Mm-hmm. So I would like everyone with the City Council and everywhere else to put the word out. All you have to do is show up with the family, have a pizza, have a pitcher of beer, pitcher of pop, water, and that will help fund the cause which we are trying to finalize here in the coming last few weeks. And Milltown Pizza is relatively new. They've only been in business for 3 months, so this is going to be a win for them to help the community, which they really like to do, and it'll help get their name out and be part of the community also, because they're just a step across the border for the Washougal city line. So as far as they're concerned, they're part of Washougal.
And they're from Washougal.
So I wanted, you probably all know Eric and Catherine, so they are the owners. So hopefully you can come out on that day. It's an all day, we'll be there all day from 11 to close. And Kyle graciously, no, I know. Kyle will be there with Dingo. He gave up kind of a miscommunication. He gave up his vacation time to be there Saturday with Dingo from 2 to 5. So he will be there with the dog. They're letting him inside also in case of a rainy day, being that he is a service dog. They can stretch the rules a little bit. And we have high people in high places that can always fend off any bad complaints. So everything you can do for that day to help participate in that would be greatly appreciated. And I expect a large turnout, and it'll be a good time for the family.
Mark, thank you for working on that. So the fundraiser is all day.
All day long.
Dingo will be there from 2 to 5.
He can only be there from 2 to 5.
Okay. Karen?
And date again?
September 28th. I will leave some flyers with up there with Rose. You have some on your counter there also, but there are actual flyers for that day's event. And it is, all you have to do is show up with the family and have a meal.
Can you pick up pizza?
Can you pick up pizza?
And still,
You can have it to go. They might even be able to see if maybe I'll get the chief to do some deliveries that day for it.
Well,
Can't do anything for me, but anyway.
With his lights on?
So yeah, it
So it
is
won't be
anything
cold?
at all of that days that they make. It's a 10% return to this fund.
we've had the pizza. It's phenomenal. So perfect.
And that's it.
great. Mark, thank you.
You're so very welcome.
Thank you for all your efforts for us. Anyone else that would like to comment to council? Okay. Melissa, you are here for an RTC update.
Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Good evening, all.
And then you've got to run to dinner, don't you?
Always.
Okay.
You know, always eating. Well, as you know, let me start up. We've been going back and forth on RTC. Some of the commissioners have been presenting these resolutions at the very last minute, not doing a public hearing for us, and we don't feel comfortable voting on them until we've talked to our respective districts, okay? Well, by the time they did that, presented them, and my time here now, they've put 4 referendums out on the ballots. I looked at the ballot electronically today, and it's like 100 pages. But anyway, there's a few commissioners that would like to see us take all the C-Tran money, BRT money out of the NTIP funding and wait until the voters have a chance to vote on an advisory, non-binding advisory vote, if they approve it or not. Because there's, and to me it's all perception of how people interpret it. Back in 2012 or 11, when it was the C-Tran Proposition Number 1, Clark County Public Transport Benefit Area Authority, Resolution BR 12009, and RCW 81.104 authorized a proposition to increase the sales and use tax by 0.1% or 1 penny on a $10 purchase to fund the C-Tran share of the maintenance and operation costs only of the Columbia River Crossing Project light rail extension between Expo and Clark Park and Ride, and the local capital share and operations and maintenance costs of the 4th Plain Boulevard Bus Rapid Transit Project. Should this be approved? Well, it was rejected. Now, people are trying to say that it's because people don't want light rail, BRT or anything like that. I read it as a tax. So you can look at it either way, which there's a lot of controversy over it. So that's why they're going to some advisory votes coming up. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's a very poorly stated proposition, and it created confusion. So the fact that it was stating, do you want to have a sales tax, and the people said no. Now, the advisory vote is to go back and clarify the question and make it very clear.
Right.
So if it was a poorly stated proposition, it's best to ask the people again, what exactly do you want, and go forward from there, which is, you say it's a perception, but if it's so controversial, it's so confusing, it's good to take it back and say, do you want to do this project, and do you want to pay for this project through taxes?
But CRC was
Or
kind of
through-
banned, shut down, and anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the last I heard, there's going to be a special meeting for C-Tran
Thursday night.
because they wanted to find out from Oregon where they stand, because Oregon was going to take it over, and we would have no say in the new bridge. That was what we last talked about at RTC. So you guys, and I went to the last C-Tran just to see, so I'd know everything going forward for October.
Well, and the Washington Attorney General said that it was legal for them to do that,
Okay. To do what?
for Oregon to take that.
It is,
take it
yes,
over.
it is legal.
Yeah. And we'd have
Yeah,
no
that's what I
say.
just said.
Okay. So there's a lot of issues up in the air, and I'm just wanting to get a feel from you folks if you're for light rail, BRT, against it, neutral, abstain, or what?
Before we go there, maybe I misunderstood, but when
Sure.
I was at the meeting, it seemed to me that what the argument was that you don't want to make a decision before the voters weigh in.
Right.
That's what some members, but it was voted
And-
down.
But the problem with that is if you take those projects out of the MTIP list, then, and the deadline for that is, I believe, October,
Yes.
then you have eliminated those projects from the possibility of funding next year. So in effect, by taking the projects off the MTIP list before the vote, you have presumed that the vote is going to want to take them off.
Correct.
In other words, you have made the decision before the voters get a chance to weigh in.
Okay, so the MTIP, it can stay on that list, and if the voters say no, it can be removed? and not-
Exactly
and
true.
not taken
Absolutely.
care of.
Absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
a placeholder. All it is really is a placeholder.
On the other hand, if you take it off, you
You've
can't
lost
put it back.
Not in the position it was in.
So
Clarify
if,
something for me there. Did you not just say that if you take it off the list, it's a dead issue for this year? Presumption is it's back on there next year.
well,
Possibly, maybe
in the
not.
same position.
Not in the same position.
given the funding cycles, it's really a 2-year funding cycle.
Well, it's,
You'll have more clarity in the next couple of weeks. Oregon still has to make their decisions and make those moves before the
Yeah,
end of
they'll know
September
more in
anyway for
October.
the federal money.
But my point is, if you take it off now, you are preempting the voters
You are.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
for a year.
for 2 years, at least.
Yeah.
The funding cycles are such that there's a deadline in October for the feds. And that funding cycle then drives the state of Washington really for 2 years.
Okay, but what's on there right now, the configuration of the project that's on there right now is unsatisfactory.
That's dead. as far-
But
that's-
the configuration is not, I know it seems like it's a configuration, but it isn't. All it is a placeholder. And you can remove that from the MTIP list in November if that's what you want to do. But if you remove it now, you can't put it back.
I think what Dave is saying is the configuration of the bridge. The configuration of the bridge doesn't have anything to do with the placement of the funding.
Well, bottom line,
Okay, but
I don't trust the city of Vancouver not to try to resurrect the CRC in its old configuration. They're making efforts to do that now.
okay.
And if this will kill that, I'm willing to do it.
I think that's what Melissa's looking for.
Yeah,
is-
I'm
is some
looking
sort of
for direction.
feedback
Well,
from,
Yeah.
Already our,
some sort of feedback from council members in regard to light rail,
our resolution, which my
less rapid transit.
iPad is dead. I can't bring it up, but we already passed a resolution with our opinion on light rail. Can anybody help me on
But
presenting
but my-
that to Melissa?
But my problem is
that's one of her
that I do
questions.
not want to preempt the voters.
No, and I have another question about the position of RTC. This is an advisory vote. An advisory vote doesn't mean they have to actually listen to the vote of the people. They can do what they want. So
Right.
what is your opinion of the RTC's look at this advisory vote? If the people say no, what are they going to say, oh, we don't really have to listen and we're going to do what we want? Or are we going to have the RTC listen to the voice of the people?
See, the advisory documents were created by the county commissioners,
Sure.
separate from RTC, because the vote was no. But
What vote?
the vote the RTC board took, for the resolutions or stuff, we voted no, but the commissioners went ahead and did the advisories anyway.
Their vote was no to do what? To go ask on a ballot? I'm not sure what you're,
I believe so. I know we voted no once to not pass any resolutions, so everybody could take them back to their representatives. And then we just kept going back and forth about one person wanting the voters to have input, and we're saying, but there's no money and no reason to take anything out until election time and the attorneys
You're talking about the
and stuff like
MTIC
that.
now, again?
Mhm.
That seems pretty clear here.
Yeah.
Yet, my fear, just like Dave expressed, we're concerned that people are going to move forward even if the people have already said no. If it was confusing, let's restate it. If they say no again, then we expect,
Okay, but what if Portland takes over and just says, we're doing it, and you're
Oregon.
then we're going to be
Oregon.
told to
Yeah.
death.
Mhm.
We'll be told.
Mm-hmm.
And then we won't have any options there.
And let's
Dave?
be,
Paul, Dave?
Nice. Paul, I understand your concern. And I normally would not like to do that, but there are times when we're in a position where we have to make decisions. That's why we're paid the big bucks.
Speak
And I
for
think this is
yourself.
one of those times.
Well, the fact that we've already passed a resolution based on,
And what was that
On the-
resolution? I'm sorry.
I don't, who can come
Dave,
up
do
with
you
that?
remember all the pieces that were in there, or the highlights of it?
The council's resolution regarding the CRC, that was
CRC.
advanced really to the legislature in their consideration. I could pull it up. I think basically the bottom line was it expressed opposition to the project in its current configuration.
Right, that's,
Light rail.
It was supportive of the notion of what the correct configuration or option should be wherever it would cross and what it would look like, but opposition to the light rail, and asked the legislature to act accordingly.
okay,
Well,
we
we
can
know the
copy it
piece
before
was
that,
no
too.
light rail, no tolls,
right.
specifically. We spelled
We're
it out.
against
And I'm
tolls.
going to email myself and make sure I forward that to you.
Okay.
Somehow I thought I had already done that.
I could make sure that.
Would you make sure of that?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The other thing to say about RTC is, let me underline the word regional. We have members from Skamania County and from Klickitat County, and also from Metro, which is Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties in Oregon, plus actually all of the legislators from the 49th, 17th, and 18th, but also Ed
Okay.
Orcutt has been coming, and he's actually in the 14th,
20th.
20th.
But he's a non-voting board member. I got
Right, well, I
clarification.
don't think the legislators have a vote anyway.
Correct, but he's been trying to.
So this is a large group that tries to act in the best interests of the region. And I would urge people to wait, because preempting it now, I think, is a mistake.
I understand that we're part of a region, and I think we should keep that in mind. I'm not interested in doing anything that's not in the best interests of Washougal within that region. Beyond that, we're being asked to let this thing go on the consideration that taking it off the list would delay things. The next thing that'll come up, and you mentioned that it's not a configuration right now. The next thing that'll come up is, well, we kept it on the list, and now there's a deadline to submit the request, and the only request we've got is the one that's the current configuration, and so we're going to have to go with that. And I just don't trust the people that are involved in these decisions in the past not to do exactly that. Tim Levitt has made it quite clear that he doesn't care what people think, he's going to do it.
You have a misapprehension about the way the funding works. The list goes through the state of Washington to the feds.
Yes, I know.
The feds then fund an amount which comes down to the state of Washington, and the state of Washington allocates that amount to the various RTCs. It is never as much as you asked for.
The projects, and
But
whether
it's-
you're ground ready or not.
It's based on
shovel
your
ready.
application, which has sufficient detail for them to evaluate the project and prioritize it.
They do not do that, though.
That's not my understanding.
What happens then is the money comes down to the RTC, and the RTC prioritizes the projects.
Yeah, but the projects that we submit go to Washington with sufficient detail that they can prioritize it. That's how they make the cut. They don't divvy it up into 50 equal parts.
Correct.
But that's not how the money comes back down. It is not allocated to a project.
And where is this on the list?
Yeah, sorry, it is, because here's an example of the paperwork cities fill out, to send in for funding, and they have to pass, safety, all kinds of checkpoints and stuff to see if they qualify and get a rating. And then from that rating, they get numbered 1 through 15 or whatever and might get a percentage. Now, I made the correlation to some of the folks when we were going through the funding. You know, we have put in an application for a streetlight at 6 by the Shell station as you're coming into town.
Yes, please.
Pardon?
Yes, please do.
Yes, because people are just still zooming 50 miles an hour. You know, it takes them a while to slow down. But it's not because no one's died. It's a low score. You know, someone pretty much, there has to be a severe accident in order for it to get bumped up on the list, because we're not asking for that much money. So I use that as an example. It's something we need, it's something we want, but there's no funding for it because there's other projects up higher.
So where is the CRC project on the MTIP list?
It's up there, but there's no funding for it
See,
at this point. And even CTRAN has said even if it was approved today, they wouldn't have any of their own funding until late 2014.
the reality on the funding is that CRC's federal funding is effectively a separate pot of money from the pot of money that would, for example, build interchanges for us on 14. If Washington and Oregon do not get approval this year for that project, that money will go somewhere else. Almost certainly at this point it will go to Hawaii to build an extension to one of the freeways on Oahu. So there's separate pots of money, but there's the additional thing that if you've got a $1 billion project that's number 1 on your list, and they fund 500 million, that does not mean that you spend the 500 million to get halfway there on your $1 billion project.
No, you have to match it.
And if you don't have the match, even though it's number 1 on your list, you move down the list.
Dave?
I'm concerned about the federal money because Patty Murray's made it, and she sits on that Senate Transportation Committee. She's made it very clear, no light rail, no bridge.
Well, Oregon has pretty much made that clear also.
Fine, I accept that. No bridge. The current bridge is going to last us for 60 years. And yes, there is some vulnerability to earthquakes. But that makes it no different from any other bridge in this country. You can't build a bridge that's not subject to earthquake. And Paul, you and I saw that in the Loma Prieta with the 880.
Yeah, but I think at this point,
That's, Joyce,
Well,
I'm going to try and move this along a little bit because we've got a lot to go over under the utilities, so.
okay, well then I'll hold my
Nope,
question.
go ahead.
No, go ahead, ask.
Well, I'm confused because if we've killed it in Washington State, why are we having a vote and why are we still talking about funding?
Ask
they-
the commissioners that. That's a good question.
Because if we aren't going to do anything and Oregon and the feds take it over, then where are we on this board? I don't understand the position
Well,
that we're even
because
having a vote.
It's no longer a Washington project. Oregon
Right,
will
so that's
will
why
fund the
I'm,
project.
yeah, so that's why I'm wondering why we're even having this discussion.
To me, it's kind of a mute point.
The reason
That
is
is-
because it was already in process before Oregon decided to do it on their own. And the fact that it could just keep rearing its head, people in Washington could ask Washington to get involved again. So our commissioners have said, let's hear from the people. After all, we represent the people. We want to hear what they want. So I personally am very grateful that our commissioners are willing to pause and ask folks what they want to spend their taxes on, or
Well, I
whatever
thought it
the
didn't
funding.
matter. Excuse me,
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
thought it was over and it didn't matter.
I
what
have another
we thought.
question about RTC. and this is very confusing for me. I hear that RTC has the BRT listed as an HCT. Can I interpret that? I used to not know what any of these
High
mean. Aren't you
capacity
proud of
train, High
me?
capacity.
Yeah. RTC has bus rapid transit listed under high capacity transit.
Uh-huh. Because it is, it's 100, it holds 100. From what I've been told, it would be under high capacity, and your next step up would be light rail.
I would really love if you could help me find that documentation
Okay.
in RTC's documents where they state the BRT is a high-capacity transit project, because C-Tran is treating it as if it's not.
Okay.
And to me, that's a real big problem when you have two agencies that are speaking different languages.
Well, it's funny because, you know, half of them are on both boards, so,
Well, and that's why we are,
you know.
It's for
You know, the-
consistency, right?
Yeah.
yeah, it's
exactly.
called, let's get clarification, but that's kind of why we keep saying, stop.
Yeah.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Let's answer these questions. These are fundamental questions. One agency that's regional is saying it's one thing, C-Trans saying it's another, and C-Trans running forward, and RTC wants to run forward. But if it's not HCT, then C-Tran has to change directions. So,
Okay, I'll find it.
and I don't know how quickly you can get that to me, but it would sure be nice to have it by Thursday night's meeting.
Sure. I'll go
Great,
through the
that's
documents.
awesome.
see
And then
what
you
I
can
do.
just pass it via email if it's electronic.
Okay.
Or I can swing by and pick it up because I'm in Kansas
Or I may go
daily.
to it and see, just for my own eyes, so I'm prepared for October 1st meeting
Sure.
to see which direction.
But I'd
I
love to
wanna go.
have that in advance so I could study it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I will look.
I don't know if the RTC has a ruling where their board changes like C-Trans is addressed every 4 years. Do you know if RTC has that same,
The whole board or just for us cities?
the whole board
Composition.
composition, like, just like C-Trans going through?
I just know about us. The positions for
Ours.
2 years and then it goes to
Oh, okay,
Washougal.
yeah,
Okay. As far as the chair, you know, there's a vice chair if Jack Berkman is reelected.
Kind of Joe's talking about the entire 25 members. Where do they
Right.
come from? Why do they come from? And does that ever get changed?
Yeah, I think it probably rotates
I could
out.
find out. It's not a creature, it's not a creature like C-Tran that's kind of local.
statute.
It's statutory and
The voting members change.
so I don't know that it's subject
Yeah.
to that same sort of thing if it's.
Well, it's
own unique
interesting because you
bylaws.
talked about the legislators don't vote, but Orchid wants to. It's possibly an avenue of addressing that. And then I was wondering about Camas and Washougal and bigger cities. Not that we're probably not big enough to get a seat at that table, but
No.
just wondering down the
Yeah.
road how that would play out.
Okay.
It's early for us, I realize, but
Yeah. No, that's fine. I can find out the other stuff for you.
Dave?
Final comment, you got a tough job. Thank you very much for representing us, and especially for coming to talk to us to solicit our opinion.
sure, that's the hardest
It's
part.
a learning curve, as Connie Joe knows. You know, the first year you're just like,
Drinking out of a fire hose.
yeah, doing the headlights. So, yeah. Thank you for letting me come and see you
And thanks
guys.
for asking us.
Thank you. Dave, let's make sure that we get a copy of our resolution over to Melissa. And then if there's still questions inside of that, then
Got till October 1st.
you're more than welcome back. And certainly, council members, if you have any comments individually for Melissa in regards to bus rapid transit, light rail,
HTC,
bridges,
all of that stuff.
any of those acronyms.
You betcha.
Yeah, all of the above.
We love the acronyms, don't we, Don?
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah.
Trevor, Karen.
Keynote.
There it is. Okay, updates on cost of service.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have Karen Johnson with FCS Group with us. We're bringing preliminary results in regards to the cost of service and rate study. And in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started.
Just jump right in there. Okay, so the first thing that I wanted to do is recap from the direction from the previous council meeting of what the revenue requirement direction was for bringing forward to the cost of service analysis. So this is just recapping that the direction was to go forward with the scenario for system reinvestment funding phased in over 10 years. What that looks like for water is 3% annual rate increases for the utility as a whole, 2014 through 2018. No increases necessary for sewer until the latter half, 2017 and 2018, of 2% annual increases. I've also shown up there what the sample bi-monthly bill would look like under each of these. And again, this is just to make sure this reflects your existing rate structure. So if you were not to make any changes based on the cost of service analysis or changes to the rate structures, what it would look like for a single-family residential customer. Your average customer uses about 1,600 cubic feet per bi-monthly usage. So their rate would go from, their bill would go from existing $78.21 to about $90.67 over the study period. So that's about an average annual increase of about $2.50 per bi-monthly period over the course of the year. And then sewer going from $113.20 to $117.77 by the end of the study period. So again, this is under the existing rate structure. What we're going to look at next is proposed changes based on doing a detailed cost allocation process and look at, from a cost of service basis, what each individual customer should pay, as well as potential changes to the rate structures. I'll get this down. Overview of the cost of service to give an idea of what the intent of this analysis is. It provides the defensible basis for assigning cost shares to the different customer classes on each utility for equity considerations. The things that we look at are how many customers are in each customer class, what's their pattern of usage or sewer contribution, what level of service do they have, and any other factors that might differentiate their usage patterns and demands on your systems. It's used to determine how we would group customer classes into categories for purposes of setting rates, and serves as the foundation for how we would design rate structures that would collect the revenue kind of in concert with your goals for pricing for your utility services. So what we go through is a detailed analysis of looking at your systems from a design criteria, looking at the usage patterns from your billing systems of your customer classes, and then allocating those costs, determining what each customer class should pay, and then developing kind of the unit cost of service for each of the functions of your water and sewer systems to help develop the rate structures. And when I get to water and sewer, I'll kind of show them a little bit more detail about that. So just right from the front, I wanted to kind of note what our major findings were from the cost of service analysis, and that is that there does appear to be subsidies that exist within both of the water and sewer utilities for some of the customer classes. When we get to each section, we'll indicate what those are. Overall, on the water utility, it's that the multifamily residential class is subsidizing other classes. In the sewer utility, it's commercial as a whole are subsidizing other customer classes. And again, those are class averages, and we'll show you a little bit more information on how we come up with that. But that it would be warranted to look at a redistribution of how you recover your costs from the different customer classes, and looking at different rate structures that might improve that equity and help meet your city pricing objectives. In looking at that, we found that there's pretty significant near-term near-term bill impacts for some of the individual customers and customer classes that we would propose developing phase-in strategies to help mitigate some of those significant impacts over time.
I don't understand that. Near-term customer bill impacts.
By going directly to what the cost of service findings would indicate, some of the individual customers would have very large increases.
Mm-hmm.
And so we looked at kind of how you can achieve those objectives over time and kind of smoothing those impacts out. Again, I've got some slides that will kind of demonstrate,
okay.
They'll demonstrate how big some of the swings are and how it would be helpful.
Okay, that's
to kind of
helpful.
smooth over time.
I am a visual learner.
First, looking at the water utility, what we look at is your customer billing statistics. We have looked at the classifications for single-family residential, multifamily residential, commercial, and large commercial. This is what we found where there are differing usage patterns that would warrant a separate rate for each of these categories. We look at the average annual usage. For example, on a monthly basis, your single-family residential on average per month use about 800 cubic feet per month, whereas multifamily use just a little bit under 7. Commercial use about 15, and then you can see large commercial uses a significant larger volume of water over the course of a year. Currently, right now, there's one customer in this large commercial class that had just very different usage patterns, warranting a separate customer classification. So we look at what they use on an annual basis and how that differs on a peak period basis. For a water utility, peaking causes one of the greatest costs of your system by having to have the facilities in place to address the peak. So we look at those differences for the customer classes. What I have kind of highlighted here under the circles is that single-family residential has about 1.25 peaking factor, and what that means is that they use about 25% more water in your summer period than they do on an average annual basis, where if you look at multifamily, they have a 1.06, so they put far less peaking on the system. That's likely due to the majority of multifamily not having the outdoor water usage that a single family does, and that your regular commercial peaks about similar to the single family, or the large commercial, where they may use a large volume of water, they use it on a relatively constant basis and not putting the peaks onto your system. So this is what warrants kind of separating the classes. Again, so we've looked at separating between single family and multifamily, commercial and large commercial. One of the things that I noted for potential future study was that the consideration of potential adding another class in the future for irrigation use. Currently, those are within your commercial customers. Irrigation accounts for commercial customers as well as your municipal parks usage would be in this category. And so while we didn't pull them out in this study period, thought there's a lot of change going on, that was something that we would want to introduce potentially in the future, but we did not incorporate it here. So there could be some discussion, policy direction, anything that you'd like to comment for me on that for finalizing the analysis.
You mentioned that the 0.25 in the single family was for summer water usage. Did you mention the commercial peak was, what that was for?
It's typically the same type of thing. Whatever you use in the summer period.
Summer, okay.
A lot of this is again why the note for potential future for irrigation. There are irrigation meters in here, and so a lot of that peak would be due to the peaking there. Just to give an idea of what the potential likely impact would be by pulling out irrigation as its own class, is the regular commercial peaking would go down, and it would be significantly higher impacts for your municipal parks and regular irrigation customers. So this is just a summary level graphic here. Behind it is a lot of detailed allocations where we go through looking at your master planning documents and how your system is designed. But in summary, for a water utility, the services that you provide are customer-related services, things related to the size of the meter, average annual use, which is considered base demand, and peak period use, which is your summertime peaking, and fire protection services. We go through and look and see what your customer's share is of all of those different functions, go through and allocate all of your budgets and your fixed assets and costs to that. And get an overall split of your total revenue requirement, how much is that by function, and then the percentages by class or how they would share in that. So what this kind of pie graph shows is that the total revenue requirement for the first year that we're looking at, 2014, is about $3.3 million. That's the amount of revenue that the water utility needs to generate from rates. It's broken down by the slices of the pie, how much is related to base demand, peak demand, customer services, fire protection, and so on. And then the percentages up there for each customer class is how much of each slice of the pie would be their share. So for example, single-family residential is about 80.7, just about 81% of your total customer base. they would pay 81% of the customer-related cost of the system, whereas if you looked over and just chose at peak demand, for example, there's 69.9% of the summer peak, and they would pay 69.9% of the peak cost. So that's the overall very high-level top summary of how the results turn out, and then this is how all the class shares are devised by multiplying these percentages by each of the slices of the pie, and you come up with this next chart here, which shows what the cost of service indicates it should look like by class, and then compares it to how you're currently generating revenues from your customer classes. So up top we have the first column is the revenue that's generated under your existing rate structures by customer class that add up to the current $3.2 million that you're currently receiving in water utility revenues. The second column, entitled 2014 Cost of Service, incorporates that 3% annual increase in total needs for the water utility, and then how the cost of service analysis indicates that should be recovered from each class. And then the third column shows the indicated decrease or increase for the revenues collected from the class as a whole. So looking at this, the water utility as a whole needs 3% additional revenues. Any customer class with a percentage above that 3 indicates that they're currently not recovering their costs. Customer classes showing a decrease show that they're currently over-recovering their cost of service. So how this looks is multifamily shows about a need for about a 38% decrease compared to an increase for single-family commercial and large commercial. I would say this is a very common finding that we find in rate studies where the same rate structure has historically been charged to the multifamily and single family. Single family use less usage per unit and also don't have the peaking, and so they generally put less of a demand on the system. So that's kind of the rationale of why they would show a decrease. And so again, what we looked at was to mitigate the swings that would happen. We also looked at 2018. What would this cost of service look like in the last year of the current study period, and then use that to help devise a phase-in strategy of how you would achieve those results by the end of the study period.
So if I understand
Sure.
this right, multifamily is subsidizing everybody else?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Is there that much multifamily to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and you can see to a lesser degree, single-family residential is a little bit closer to their cost of service than some of the commercial customers are, but in total, residential combined with single-family, multifamily are closer to their cost of service than commercial. But overall, it's the multifamily that has the biggest kind of over recovery at this point. You can also, if you kind of look at those unit costs down at the bottom, I didn't mention that earlier, what these unit costs are at the bottom, if you just took the total revenue divided by the total usage by each class and in total, not looking at what kind of a rate structure you have, this is what you should be looking at. So you can see multifamily currently pays about $4.13 per unit compared to what the analysis shows that they should be paying about $2.56.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So this next chart here, the top of it just recaps the one from the very previous page, just so we can have them all here on the same page. So this is the top is what the original full cost of service analysis is, and then the bottom is what the annual adjustment would be by customer class over the study period to kind of phase into the goals by the end of the study period. What we recommended doing was, rather than reducing the multifamily class, the 38%, and increasing all the other customer classes to that extent, is just hold them at their current cost recovery. So no increase or decrease with their rates over the study period, and leaving that for them to catch up to their cost of service over time as your costs increase. And then single-family residential is set equal to the system-wide average, and then commercial 4.5%, large commercial 5.5%. So what the strategy accomplishes is the revenues generated from holding that multifamily flat instead of reducing them helps to mitigate some pretty significant increases in the single family and commercial classes. And again, these numbers here are looking at the class as a whole, like 6.4% for single family as a whole, 13%, for example, as a whole for commercial. Within those classes, there's significant bill variations based on usage. And so that's kind of why this suggesting that phasing it in would make that probably a lot more palatable to achieve that over time. What we looked at in structuring the rates was listening to comments from the previous meeting and kind of based on our experience in other rate structures is what the goals would be for changing the water rate structures. We want to generate appropriate cost recovery from your fixed charges that balance customer affordability with revenue stability. One of the comments early on was for the typical residential customer, there's that 10 CCF usage allowance in there, and then what we're looking at is how we would adjust that downward but still maintain revenue stability for the utility. So currently you are generating about 68% of your total water utility costs from the fixed charge and about 32% from the volume charge. So that's a little bit on the high side, and what happens there is you don't provide your customers with a lot of flexibility in controlling their bill. Pretty much that's warranted because of the 10 CCF usage allowance. If you use less than that, your bill isn't going to change. So that's one of the things that we're looking at revising. Best practice for water utilities is to generate about 40% from your fixed charges as an appropriate balance between making sure there's enough revenue generated in the utility to pay for your costs of your infrastructure and providing opportunities for customers to control their water bill by varying their usage level. And so that's what we targeted the strategy to achieve.
I understand that's the rate structure goals. I'm curious, what are the actual costs? What are the costs? What percentage of the actual costs are capital or fixed as opposed to variable or production?
In utilities, and I don't have the exact percentage, but the fixed charge is not designed to recover the fixed costs of a utility, because you are highly capital-intensive fixed costs in a utility. So you would literally almost be at a flat rate if you were to try to recover fixed costs from fixed rates. And so that's where kind of the utility practice is that you generate a reasonable amount to recover from fixed, but it's not from what you might typically hear from an accounting perspective where fixed costs should be recovered from fixed charges. For water utilities, that would primarily be a fixed rate or pretty close to it. With debt service and salaries and all of your costs that are primarily fixed in nature, particularly fixed in the short term, you would end up with a pretty high cost recovery from fixed charges, and kind of contrary to the charge based on usage philosophy for a water utility.
I lived in a city in California for many years that had a flat rate for their water and sewer. And, it didn't make sense. The city had basically got 10 inches of rainfall a year, but it was on a huge aquifer that they had no problem generating enough water for to operate the city's needs. It seems to me that, I don't know if that's even legal to do that.
Charge a flat rate?
Yeah.
It is within the city's discretion to charge the rates needed to recover their revenues, whether from fixed charges or volume charges. So it's not that it's not legal, it's kind of balancing equity.
They had some problems
Right.
with environmental rules and things like that, including water conservation rules. But
Right.
What I would be wondering about is if, seems to me there might be some administrative costs if we just charged a flat rate that would be saved, and would that have a significant impact on this? We wouldn't have to deal with meters.
Well, that's certainly an option for the
I'm not
for the- for the-
suggesting, I'm
for the
just kind of
council.
thinking out loud.
What the impact
Thinking out loud here, what would that?
where that would happen is your low water users would essentially be subsidizing your high water users. And so while there's been concern over customers just having that 10 CCF usage allowance in there when they're not using that, it would be that type of an issue. You'd have the customer that, I have 2 people in the house and we're paying the same as someone who waters
I don't
their
think it's a good
yard.
idea,
Yeah.
but I'm just wondering what kind of component, how much we'd save if we didn't have to deal with meters and things like that.
I'd have to defer to what your meter costs are. I'm not familiar off the
We'd
top
have to
of my
analyze
head.
that if we didn't
That's
need
not- no.
resources to do meter reading.
Well,
And-
let me just retract that wild thought there.
My concern
Trying to
is
do away with
actually
that.
the opposite of what you said, which is that if you're charging $2 a unit for water that costs you 2 cents to produce, then the large users are subsidizing the small users.
You're talking about the marginal cost concept of the first
Exactly.
unit of water. It's a philosophy of whether you're going to charge each customer the next increment of water used. It's a complex analysis, complex structure. To where I think that's where the thought was back when declining block rates were designed, which is one of the things that we were asked here to remove. It's pretty contrary to current trends and conservation incentives and direction is for the more you use, the less that you pay. That kind of goes on that same marginal cost concept that you're referring to. And so what utilities look at are averages for the, recovering costs on an average basis as opposed to a marginal cost basis. Where you might see more of a marginal cost analysis like that is maybe in an area where they have severe water shortages and the next cost of supply is incrementally very expensive. They might look at doing something like that. It's not something that I consider probably a recommendation for the city. Kind of having that kind of a complex structure. Did I address your questions? The other thing we're looking at is moving towards cost of service, understanding that the goal is to achieve as much equity as possible and moving to cost of service over time, but doing that in a rational approach to where it doesn't have really large impacts to your individual customers. One of the main goals that I heard from our, when we first began the study was looking to provide rate relief for your low water users and to then send appropriate pricing signals to your high water users. And so that's kind of how we structured the design of the rate structure to provide those opportunities.
Pricing signals, like warning?
Pricing signals,
warning,
yeah, I mean, well,
This is coming if you don't stop using?
well, there's 2 things. You can either have that price high for those high water users to encourage them to conserve. And the message is that if they don't conserve, at least they're paying for using the additional water. And so it's really, you're giving them the choice.
And you're comparing high water users in both commercial and residential?
Primarily.
Because they're different categories.
Yeah, they're different customer classes. Primarily for rate structures for water, it's the single-family resident that you're looking for low waters versus high, and peaking just because of the nature of residential customers is far different than the business. So a business who uses a lot of water in their business is not necessarily creating high costs on your system. So it's very separate from single-family residential. What this bullet here primarily represents is single-family residential.
Okay.
That's quite a switch, flip from 68 fixed, 32 volume to basically something close to the inverse of it.
Going from 68 to 40. That again, kind of that's where the phase-in strategies come in. As you will see, it going to it immediately was just pretty significant impacts, and going to it over time addresses both kind of the best management practices for the utility as well as helping to reduce that fixed allowance that some of the low water users are having to pay for.
I remember in Oregon, they had a concern, this is not water, but it seems like it's a similar economic concept. They had a concern that with hybrid cars and electric cars, that they weren't going to generate enough gas tax to pay for the wear and tear on the roads that these cars would generate. If we do this, switch to this kind of system, and conservation really works well, is it possible that our revenues would decline so much from the volume charge that we'd have to rework this structure?
There's always the possibility when you change your rate structure that customers will change their patterns and use less water. We have incorporated kind of an elasticity of demand factor into the design of the rates for assuming that those in kind of the top category would probably reduce some of their water usage. It is a suggestion whenever you significantly change your structure, which I would consider this a fairly significant change, is you would want to monitor what those customer usage patterns are, 3 to 5 years, and you have to keep an eye on it and make the judgments of whether it's occurring as planned. So we've definitely incorporated that in there and would recommend kind of taking a look at that. And I can show you, so I think right here, couple slides more, I can show you a little bit more how that works. I just wanted to summarize what the existing structure is and what the proposed rate structure is to achieve these goals. So currently you have a base charge that increases with the meter size, and it includes a usage allowance that also increases with the fixed charge. So I think the most common familiarity is that there's 10 CCF usage allowance in the 3/4 inch charge that primarily affects single-family residential and small commercial, but there's also a usage allowance that affects all of the customer classes. Your multifamily class is charged per dwelling unit, and it has a usage allowance per dwelling unit based on the 3/4 inch size. And then there's a 6-block decreasing volume charge applied to all usage above the allowance, and the structure applies to all of your customers. But within that 6 blocks, your single-family residential, there's pretty big blocks in that first one. Your single-family residential is primarily in that first block, whereas your large commercial is primarily in those last two blocks. And so what we're looking to do is reduce the allowance over time to address the affordability issues appropriately balanced with the revenue stability concerns, establish a tiered volume rate structure for single-family residential, which again aligns those blocks with low users, medium users, and high users, and then establish class-specific single-block volume charges for your other customers. That's multifamily, commercial, and large commercial would each have a single-block rate, but it would be specific to the cost to recover from their classes. What the rate strategy is for single-family residential is the proposal is to move immediately in 2014 to the 3-tiered block rate structure, again designed on the usage patterns. Reduce the allowance over the 5-year period, so we're beginning in 2014 through 2018. We would be reducing the 10 CCF allowance down to 5 CCF per bi-monthly bill. Just to give an indication of that, currently right now about a little over 41% of your customers currently use at or below 10 CCF. So that kind of shows where that usage
What
allowance is a
percent,
little
sorry?
bit high, about 41%, just a little over 41%.
Or at 10 or below?
Or at 10 or below. So that does, speak to the issue that usage allowance is a little bit high. And so, again, reducing that down to 5, a little bit more appropriate to give you, so that's where you would achieve that 40% revenue recovery, and there's just about 15% of the customers are at about 5% or below. So I think it brings a little bit closer to what the usage patterns are for the customers, while appropriately giving you enough revenue to make sure you can pay your debt, your debt in particular. Multifamily residential and commercial, we would reduce the allowance over 5 years to 50% of the existing allowance by meter size and move immediately to the class-specific volume charges for those classes. Large commercial would reduce the allowance over the 5-year period to 50% of the existing charge. Immediately condense from 6 blocks to 2 blocks, because currently you have 6 blocks, and that large commercial customer is really falling in the latter 2 blocks and not a lot of usage going through there. So there wasn't a need to transition so much over the full period. So immediately condensed to 2 blocks, and then the remaining 2 blocks would be kind of merged together over the remaining study period. So that's just kind of the narrative of what the strategy is. I know there's a lot of numbers on this chart, but to kind of indicate what that means, you can see up there on the top, bi-monthly base charge, you have the meter size, and then what the existing rate is for each of the meter sizes and the usage allowance that it includes. So that first kind of shaded is what the current usage allowance is by meter size. And then you can kind of see there at the bottom where that indicates the 68% recovery that you're currently getting from your fixed charge. What we're recommending is phasing down evenly over the 5-year period. So you can see on that top line, just as an example, the 3/4 inch is going from an allowance of 10 to 98765. You can see that those are all transitioning down to the end of the study period, and that's where you'll achieve the 40%. So kind of transitioning out the usage allowance at the same time you're transitioning down the percentage from the fixed cost recovery. So that's how the base charges would work, and those apply to all of the customer classes. And then your existing volume charges down on the bottom, you can see the 6 blocks there with the current charges for that applicable to all customers. And then the proposal is the single-family residential. So you can see the tiered block rate structure that we're proposing is you would have your block 0 to 14, and again for each over the study period this would change based on what the usage allowance is. So it's really what that is over the usage allowance until you get down to the final year is like 332 for the first year, and then from 14 to 40, and then the last block is everything over 40. How we devise the structure is we typically look at, so that first block is set based on the winter period average usage for a single family customer, meaning that if you have a residential customer that doesn't really do a lot of peaking usage, not a lot of the outdoor usage, and they tend to constantly use kind of a winter average, kind of representative of indoor water usage, they're likely going to stay in that bottom block and pay the lower rate. And then as you use more water usage, you would go into the higher blocks. We set that over 40, that's about 5% of your customers there. So that top block is really targeted at the higher incremental cost for your 5% highest water users. And then that middle block kind of captures the average, kind of average use with a normal amount of peaking period. And then we just establish the rates for that. And what this allows you to do, rather than charging a single volume charge for everyone, this allows rate relief for the low water user if you stay within that first block. Then for multifamily, we've moved to the single family usage charge commercial, the usage charge single block, and then large commercial be from 0 to 3,500 CCF, and then block 2 and over 3,500, or where we currently moved that.
Let me ask, maybe I misunderstood. I thought a current unit was 1,000 cubic feet. Is
1,000
that
cubic.
Is that correct?
Yeah,
One
10
u-
CCF.
10 CCF.
Yeah,
So-
7,500 gallons every 2 months.
Right, so somebody who's using 5 units now is using 50 CCFs, correct?
No. 75 or 750 times 5, 3750.
Yeah, 3,750, just under 4,000 gallons, 2,000 gallons a month.
You're not talking
If you're,
gallons.
no, if you're using 10 units, you're using 10,000 cubic feet.
10 units is 1,000.
Right. 10 units is 1,000 cubic feet, or 1 unit is 1,000 cubic feet?
1,000, when we read the meter and you get your 10 CCF,
Yeah,
that's 1,000 cubic
it
feet.
doesn't say CCF, it says units. So what is a unit?
It's a CCF.
Yeah, which is 7,500 gallons every 2 months.
So
So
unit is
7,500 gallons is
1,000 cubic feet.
Yeah, 1,000 cubic feet.
Yes,
Okay, so,
every 2 months.
right. So, everybody falls in, anybody who's using so someone who's using 10 units in 2 months falls where in that single-family block in the bottom chart?
Block 1.
Yeah, anyone using from 0 to 1,400 cubic feet.
Okay, so, and 10 units is 1,000 cubic feet?
Yes, basically, we don't read the last 2 dials on the meter.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
So 10 is
yeah,
1,000.
Okay.
I don't look at the meter, I look only at the bill.
Yeah.
And so 10
I don't blame
units, 10 units is 1,000 cubic feet.
That's right, that's correct.
Okay. So it's 10 CCFs.
Yes.
Okay.
And so again, the majority of your customers are, prior to the 40. Anyone using over 40, that's a really high usage for single-family
yeah.
residential. And you have a very small percentage of your customer base using that. So you have a small percentage of your customer base using a lot of water. And that's kind of what that last tier is structured to charge for.
We've identified that user.
5%.
Is that still going on?
I
That
actually want to
wasn't.
know if I had the highest water bill in the city last month.
What did you
It was
do?
$456. I think it was 90 units.
Nothing special.
That's
Wow.
gotta be a
Yeah.
leak.
One
Anyway.
would hope so.
20 minutes and you've got 14 pages to go.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll check.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
I need help.
So, so this graphic here illustrates how then that rate structure would apply to individual usage patterns. And so what we have down across the bottom is the bimonthly water use, 0 to 50, 100 cubic feet per month. The left-hand side shows what your bi-monthly bill would be. So what we're showing there is where you have, kind of see that, kind of the orange line is the
You're not on the
proposed
chart.
bill compared to the black line, which is the existing bill. What we're highlighting there with that line that's going down there right around the 1,400 cubic feet. So that's showing that about 61% of your customer bills for 2014 rates will actually see a decrease in their monthly bill. Then showing 39% would see an increase in their bill. So again, 14 and below would see a decrease, then it slightly increases between the middle, and then when it cuts off there, right around that 40 is where that third block is, a little bit higher incremental increases there. But again, about, the majority of your customers don't use more than 30. It's really high. About 90% of your customers use 30 or less, and I think right around 20 is probably around, 70% of your customers are probably around there. So the majority of your customers will be on the left-hand side of this chart with reductions in their bill or slight increases, and then a small proportion would have the increasingly higher bills.
So if we put this to a public vote, we know what would happen.
That's why we have representative government.
Okay, and then this next chart just shows a few more examples for sample single-family residential water bills. What we're looking at here is just to show what the impact would be over the course of the 5-year study period. What that top line is for single family, and these are just samples, just examples that we've pulled out of the database. What we're considering a low water user with a 3/4 inch meter using 500 cubic feet per bi-monthly period, they would see about a 33% overall decrease over the study period. Whereas then if you kind of jump up to your really high water user, that's 116.5. So if yours was 90, you were not the highest because there was someone at 116.5.
Close.
Again, and they would have a significantly larger increase, with your average customer being about the 18%, which is right in line with what we showed that the single-family class as a whole would need to increase over the study period. So that's kind of how it's geared to. A low water user would get less than the average increase, an average single-family user would get about the average needed for the class, and then the higher use you get incrementally, the higher your rate would be.
It's gonna go up.
Couple of samples for multifamily water bills. Again, the kind of a dynamic of whether you're a low water user and your function of your number of dwelling units. So again, just a random sampling of what we've pulled out of the system to show what some impacts for multifamily would be. As we noted, there's an overall needed decrease in that customer class, and we have showed, putting them at no change for the customer class as a whole, but individual customers would change based on their usage. You can see that's ranging from a low use, low number of units would have a decrease, high use, high number of units would have a higher increase. Again, just all kinds of data points in between. Looking at your regular commercial water bills, same thing, your low water users are going to see about a 33% decrease over the study period, and then just showing some different impacts of, depending on what your meter size is and how much water you use, how that might vary. So you'll see over the course of the 5 years, there's decreases, there's moderate increases, and then there's some that are slightly higher. We looked at that from an annual basis and looked like there wasn't any real significant outliers for commercial to smooth this over the study period. So again, this kind of highlights the need for the phase-in strategy, because if you did all this in 1 year, you'd be seeing these types of impacts for customers in that first year. So by phasing it over the 5-year period, you can kind of smooth people into or down from where they should be with more moderate impacts. One final bill is, this is what the large commercial is currently going to be looking at. 8-inch meter would be about 5.5% increases per year. Pardon me?
Are we doubling his? No.
No, increasing at 30%.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, 5.5% per year. Yeah. Okay, so that is the final results of the water utility. Looking at the sewer utility, we went through the same process and kind of quickly go through here. For the sewer utility, there's about $3.7 million in a revenue need for 2014, and its functions are broken down into kind of customer-related costs, your flow-related cost, and then your strength-related costs for BOD and TSS. So biochemical, oxygen demand, and total suspended solids are the functions that we've looked at allocating your system costs to. And then looking at single-family residential, multifamily, and commercial, going through the same process of determining what their share of each one of those costs are by looking at kind of what your design criteria is, what the usage is. As you know, sewer is not monitored for your customers, so we base that on water usage. So for example, a single-family residential customer, we would determine their flow based on their winter period, so you can exclude all that outdoor water usage that doesn't go into the sewer system. So again, it's looking at using water usage adjusted for outdoor usages that don't go into the system to as a surrogate for what sewer flow would be. And going through the results here, we can see some pretty substantial differences here. Looking at the top, again, there's no overall rate increase proposed for 2014 for the sewer utility. Again, there was no increases needed until like 2017. So this is looking at revenue neutral for the utility as a whole, but cost of service shifts for the individual customers. So you can see the commercial class shows a need to decrease by about 60%. And so this is where we ran into some real significant struggles in how to adjust this in a rational manner without having really significant increases. Because while the commercial class on average is shown it needs to go down 60%, within that class there are significant swings with customers needing decreases, customers needing increases, some really needing large increases, just because of the current flat rate structure that you have for commercial and sewer. It's not directly correlated to the water usage. And so there's significant shifts that we needed to look at and figure out how to best approach achieving something equitable over time. You can really see the difference down this bottom chart where we're looking at the unit costs. Single family and multifamily are running around $7, and that commercial is at $24. So significantly out of sync with what an indicated cost of service would be. And so a real challenge in how we would put together a strategy for you. So just to kind of demonstrate this a little bit more, I have a couple of kind of scattergrams that we put up there to show what the issue is. Just on looking at this, we have the average current monthly bill down at the bottom and the percentage increase those customers would see up at the top. So you can see there's a lot of customers down there that are showing a decrease wherever that dots are below the zero. We have decreases, and quite a few in the $100, $200 range seeing couple 100% increases, and then we've got this smattering of quite a few customers that are going to see really, really high increases on a percentage basis. 2,500% increase. While some of these may be really small dollar amounts, the percentage increase is really significant and so varied among the spectrum of your commercial customers that it's kind of challenging to solve the problem in an easy way. Another way to look at it is this is the same type of information, percentage increase, graphed against what the average bi-monthly consumption is. And again, you can see that the lower water use is getting the highest percentage increases, and it's really all over the board from having 500% decreases to 2,500% increases. Summarized that for you here on just kind of looking at what that really means in terms of how customers might be impacted. About greater than 75% reduction up to what the increases are. So 22% of the commercial customers will see greater than a 75% reduction in their bill if we base this on cost of service.
What kind of customers?
These are commercial customers.
Why would they see? Is there a certain? Why is that? I mean, is it a certain class of commercial customer?
It's again, I'd say it's all over the place. That's why we have the issues. Currently, your rate structure, which I can kind of summarize on the next page, does not charge based on volume. It's a flat rate.
Okay.
And so the flat rate, when we went and looked at it, it doesn't correlate.
So we're correlating it to water usage.
We're correlating it to just a reduction in the bill. So we could look at what types of customers are in each one of these categories. That's basically what our next steps are.
Okay.
So just to demonstrate here that it's so significant in such swings, for example, 22% seeing a 75% reduction on up to 9% seeing 1,000% increase and on. And so the proposal just to demonstrate that the flat rate structure, because it's on a per unit basis, some things might be per number of employees, some things might be per number of bar stools or whatever it might be, that they're just not appropriately aligned with when we've gone through and looked at what it should be, basing it on flow and kind of strength characteristics. And so a little bit more work and challenge to get this to be some kind of a rational change for you. So what our recommendation here is looking at your ultimate goals, which is to eliminate the complex commercial flat rate structure and charge commercial customers based on their contributed flow and strength concentration. And again, to move towards what that would indicate they would pay on a cost of service basis over time while trying to smooth some of these huge rate increases. Again, here's just summarized quickly. Single family has a flat rate per unit. Multifamily has a flat rate that's equal to the single family rate for the first dwelling unit, and then a discounted rate per additional unit after that. And the commercial flat rates per unit vary by type of business. And so, against all kinds of different unit type of bases that it applies to. What we would propose for the ultimate transition is to maintain the residential class specific flat rates per unit. You would eliminate that additional charge per multifamily and just do one flat rate per unit for them. Again, just simplify your rate structure there. And for commercial, we would propose establishing a commercial minimum charge that's equal to the single-family flat rate. How that would be comprised is you'd have a fixed charge that's equal to the single-family rate less what's assumed in their flow to develop that rate, again based on winter period usage. So the single-family flat rate is derived by assuming 1,400 cubic feet per month in sewer contribution. And then the volume rate for commercial would be applied to actual water usage above that. So for example, if you were a commercial customer who used only 1,400 or who contributed with the assumption of used 1,400 cubic feet of water per month, they would pay the same as a single family. As you use more than the 1,400, then the volume rate would apply to any usage over that. Okay. So that's the ultimate structure that we would suggest trying to transition to. It's just, you know, how, over what period of time to move to that. So the recommended strategy, because there is no rate increases needed for the sewer utility for the next 3 years, 2014, 15, and 16. We're proposing maintaining the existing rate structure and applying the proposed utility rate increases across the board to your existing rates. So there would be no change to the rates 2016 through 18, and then those 2% would kick in 2017, 2018. And then we would develop a longer-term strategy to help improve the equity issues and mitigate these customer impacts. So our proposal is to continue working with city staff over this next several months to come up with a rational phase-in strategy to accomplish that. And then if any potential changes brought forward for 2015 to 2018.
How close does this come to the philosophy of pay for what you get?
Cost of service is the philosophy of paying for what you get. Where we are with the phase-in strategy is trying to get there over a longer period of time.
Okay.
Yeah, just so you don't have these big increases.
We're eliminating the subsidies.
The intent is to eliminate the subsidies. We're going to need to do it over a longer period of time is the suggestion.
Those are headed in the right direction.
Headed in the right direction.
Is there an intent to look at classes of use? What pops into my mind immediately is the Mount Norway Nursery store up here, which has a drive-through coffee bar, but
It's closed.
Not anymore.
I know
It's
it's
gone.
closed. But the vast amount of water that they would use is watering their plants, which does not contribute to sewer usage.
Right.
And they do that, well, maybe they don't do it in January. So is the intention is to key water usage to wintertime, or do you create different classes depending on the use, or?
Generally speaking, for sewer rate making, the single-family class is based on a winter period usage because of the outdoor usage.
Right.
Most commonly, the commercial class is just based on their actual water usage, with the presumption that the majority of commercial customer usage does go into the system. Then you're faced with these anomalies that you're talking about, where you do have some customers that do a lot of outdoor or processing that doesn't actually go into the system. So
Yeah.
that's what we would want to look at. That's
Yeah,
that's
the
one
ones
of the
that come to
main
mind
things.
immediately are the hardware store and Bimart, which have large amounts of plants that they water from spring through fall.
So what our proposal is you know, we need to work through this a little bit better, a little bit more time taken to we just ran into such a challenge with how big these swings were. What we would propose doing is doing things just like that, is then going down and dissecting for all these 100 commercial customer accounts, what's the impact on each customer bill, trying to make some sense out of you know, what might be a good transition strategy. That would be one thing we would definitely want to look at. Or are there types of customers that should be grouped into something where they have a winter period usage or some kind of a discount from the actual water usage. Also looking at the strength differentials. We were originally looking at bringing forward commercial based on domestic strength and high strength, and again complicated again by the findings that would be the ultimate goal, is to also look at, you know, high strengths like from a a restaurant versus an office building. So that's the challenge, is looking at the current rate structure where it's, you know, by number of employees, and transitioning to what their real water usage is and what that impact is. So again, any other comments? So that's a helpful categorization, is identifying customers where water usage isn't maybe the most appropriate surrogate would be good things to identify. Okay. Have just last slide here. This is just showing a combined, based on our proposal, a combined water, sewer, and storm bill. Again, what this chart represents the 10 CCF bi-monthly. I'm using this as an example because familiarity with that single-family residential CCF. I think you're used to seeing what that rate is there for water, 6038, going up over the study period, and then the sewer staying the same until the last couple years, and then we've just added in storm here for reference to look at the total bill. So under this scenario, the bills would, on a combined basis, stay just under $200 per bi-monthly period for 2014, and then increasing there. Again, this is looking at a single-family residential customer using 10 CCF, so those currently at the threshold of the first allowance. Then I've showed another one, I think a little bit more representative of the class as a whole, showing what the bill would look like for the average use, which is 1,600 cubic feet, showing that the rates would go from 215 to 219 and then going up over the study period. So just some information on, with the current proposal of phasing in the water rate structure, no changes to the near-term sewer rate structures, and then
This includes utility taxes too, right?
yes.
Our rates do include the taxes.
Yes. Then a final graphic here that's just for informational purposes of looking at kind of neighboring jurisdictions and a comparison of the water and sewer bi-monthly bills. Again, this is all assuming the 1,600 cubic foot average of what it looks like for the city, showing your current, and this is just has water and sewer. It's about 191 going to 190, 194. Assuming no changes to the rate structure or based on the cost of service first year going to 92.20. So again, always cautionary on showing these types of charts. They're not necessarily apples to apples, depending on what's happening with the individual utilities and how they're doing their cost recovery practices. Just gives an idea of where you currently fall within the neighboring jurisdictions. Then finally, just to kind of talk about what we see the next steps being is to incorporate the findings from the, we have currently in process, part of the study is a physical property audit of all the commercial and multifamily customers to go out, actually look at the property and make sure that there's consistency between what the property type is, what their meter size is, to what the billing system is saying, is to, again, just double check that the billing system appropriately represents the customer base, incorporating any policy direction from you, and then finalizing the proposed water rates. Continuing work on sewer cost of service and rate strategies probably through 2014. Updating the water and sewer system development charges, and then city staff, of course, continuing to evaluate any kind of CIP cost containment opportunities that can be derived. Summary slide on what the requested policy direction is for us to complete the analysis that we have before you today is concurrence or changed policy direction on the customer classes that we have selected for water. That's single family, multifamily, commercial, and large commercial. The proposed changes to the water rate structure and the phase-in strategy, and then concurrence on the short-term and long-term cost of service rate strategies. Any comments or information for that? So that's where I have.
If I could have maybe 30 seconds to summarize, Mayor, thank you. Thank you, Karen. I wanted to thank Karen very much for trying to achieve the goals that we set forth. And I think the one telling slide, there's lots and lots of information here, but the one telling slide was the graph that showed what percentage of customers in their water usage under the water rate phase-in strategy would see next year would see a decrease, and what percentage next year would see an increase. And anyone who is using about 14 CCF or below in the first year would see a decrease. It may not be a huge decrease, but it's going to stay flat or go down. for water, and then to the right you see the 39%. This was a rate design and phase-in strategy intended to answer the policy direction that we received, which was that low water using customers should see relief. In spite of the fact that we need 3% more revenue for the water utility as a whole and to redistribute accordingly. And so I think we've achieved the policy direction that we've received on the water side. We have not yet been able to accomplish that on the sewer side because of the significance of the findings. If the findings had not been as significant, we would have a similar type of approach for you. We need to do some more work. One other thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at every single commercial customer's bill on the water side so that we can see exactly what that is and talk to our businesses about this. And so what we're hoping for is some feedback that says, yes, you heard us, and yes, this is the direction and the approach. And when we're back in 3 weeks, we'll have worked through all those commercial bills. We'll have a better feel for that if there's any adjustments that would need to be made. But ultimately, we would be proposing an ordinance for the council that you could adopt here over the next period of time this year, where we would make the changes in the water rate structure and levels and phasing out the base allowance and meeting the 3% revenue needs each year, and bring an ordinance for you to achieve that, keep the sewer rates flat for everybody and not make any changes there but no increases, and then continue work on the project. And then sometime next year we would have solutions for the latter part of the study period on the sewer side.
You would not start fiddling with the sewer within the class type, whether...
Not in the very short term.
Okay.
We always want to try to bring you a comprehensive, rational solution, and I think in the short term we need more time on the sewer side, whereas on the water side...
So you propose that for next year?
Right. Okay. But what the ordinance would show for sewer, keeping the same rate structure, would be 0%, 0%, 0% for 14, 15, and 16, and 2% and 2% for 17 and 18. So at least it would lock that in, but then expect some adjustments within the classes as we would implement the cost of service. And then you would see the changes, and there'd be an introduction on the cost of service. So there is the opportunity for the low water using single family user to see real rate relief next year in their water rates, and an incentive for folks to conserve and to have some more control. But that phases in over time so that the impacts can be mitigated, as she mentioned. So it's 9 CCF next year, and then 8,765. And appreciate Karen's perspective on that balancing act between not diving all the way to that immediately, and so that you can mitigate the impacts. So.
Joyce?
While we're restructuring water costs, are we also looking at the expenses of how we run our plant, the efficiencies there, to perhaps, are there places to reduce the actual cost of producing the water or handling the wastewater?
Yeah, so we had spoken previously about technology improvements as far as, automated meter reading and other opportunities to be able to maximize efficiency and effectiveness. So we're still scrubbing those opportunities. Some of those were identified originally by SAIC for us to take further to see if there was some feasibility, if there was some fruition in being able to do that. And so we are looking at that on the operation and maintenance side at the same time with the CIP.
Because if we can lower our need, then the rates will fall also.
Right. The key opportunity for savings is less in the O&M and more in the capital.
Right.
When you look at the percentages of where these costs are driven, it's in the capital. You may recall in the SAIC study that as they pointed to future years, they talked about what the actual additional expenditures that we need to make to keep pace and to be best practice in terms of staffing levels. And so what we're trying to do through Trevor's work is cost avoidance, future cost avoidance, so that we can be more efficient as the utility grows. But he also does look for, and is looking for efficiencies in real time. Where we really hope to see some fruit is on the capital side.
Yeah.
And we've done quite a bit of that already. And there's a couple of things, we don't have all the details to share, but there are a couple possible opportunities, one in sewer, one in water, that could knock off some significant money off of the capital plan in this next cycle, which, if we can achieve that, even if you've already passed an ordinance in October or November, we'll bring that back right away and make whatever adjustment could be done to that. And just thank Representative Pike, for example, you know, the $1 million that went to the storm project, and we had hoped it would go to the sewer plant. On our behalf, she's trying to work that through the system, and it looks promising, but not for sure, that in the 2014 supplemental, they would so redirect those funds, because it wouldn't be a new appropriation. That has an impact that Karen's group has actually kind of looked at. It's modest. It's $1 million in capital support, direct appropriation. What it does to a sewer bill is it just overall brings the revenue down just a little bit, but every little bit helps. So
Temper that, though, because on the other side right now, we have it programmed for storm, which is what it was approved for. And
right.
Some of those things in storm that we would have done with that, we now need to do with other monies, but it's less money than what the $1 million is, so.
Right, and we have enough cash right now in storm, but yeah, there's a little give and take, of course, on that.
One thing I would add on your physical audit, it makes sense to look especially at the high water users on the residential side and make sure that they are actually single family as opposed to multifamily. I know in the past that we've identified a number of multifamily situations that were listed as single family to a revenue detriment.
And they could be in a different customer class.
We identify some of those every month that are in the wrong ones.
So I would just ask that we add that to the fiscal audit.
And that's exactly what it is doing. Yep.
It appears to me that you're implementing the philosophy that we asked you to implement, which was more or less pay for what you get, and you're doing it over a 10-year period to mitigate too rapid or too extreme changes. So it appears to me you're on the right track.
I think it's excellent, and I would suggest proceed the way you're going.
Okay, thank you.
Joyce, a little bit more in answer to your question as well, though. If you remember back a couple, 3 weeks ago, or excuse me, the last presentation that Trevor and Karen did, we've already started some of those savings in there. One of the reasons that we don't need as much revenue is we've already cut expenses out by 6%. Is that what it was? Something close to that.
On an overall level, I can't remember exactly, but
That we've achieved through some efficiencies just in the last couple of years, and that's just in the way that Trevor's people are doing their work and how we're doing it brought that number down by a 6% figure. So that's an ongoing one, and frankly, it's an ongoing one, whether it's water, sewer, the police side, the fire side, anybody else. It's almost mission one that's out there as we start signing purchase orders. So.
Thank you.
Karen, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, and I realize we needed to cut this a little bit short in regards to discussion, but certainly don't hesitate to get any questions, any thoughts, any comments, any suggestions Trevor's way to make sure that they're in the hopper as we proceed that way. Okay, with that, we are going to adjourn for the moment. We'll be back here in 20 minutes. All right, it's a few minutes short, 20 minutes for a regular meeting.